Hi everyone, thanks for reading with me today. It's Dr. Laporte, and I just wanted to talk about the structure of a journal article. So journal articles are the way that scholars summarize their work. It is the primary source record for firsthand research. So research can be done through many different ways, through interviews, through looking at data, through firsthand work, experiments in the lab. There's lots of ways we can do research, but they're summarized in this format, which is the empirical journal article. Empirical journal articles can be pretty difficult to read, but the thing is there's a trick to them, and the trick is that there is a specific format that they follow every single time. So if you look at the screen in front of you, I have an article called Chicken, 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 Chicken. It's by Doug Zonker, and he wrote this when he was at the University of Washington. This is not a real article. This is something that was put together, kind of as a joke. If you look on YouTube, you'll find an old video that discusses this specific article. But it's really useful in trying to understand what a journal article looks like. So if we take a look at the top, we've got the title, we've got the author, we've got his affiliation. These things change. You often see up in the top the journal that it's published in. You'll find things like the volume and edition number and the dates. And that's just put in there by the periodical so you can keep track of it. Now, the article itself is going to be structured the way we're about to go through. Sometimes it's in two columns like this. Sometimes it's one column. That can all change. But what you normally see in a journal article is that it opens up right here. You see this where it says chicken? I mean, it all says chicken. But this is the abstract or the overview for the article. When we abstract an article, we're pulling out just the key points to get the argument down and the results down without a lot of detail. Abstracts are typically about 200 words long. Now, once we're into the article, you'll notice that there's a first section. They're normally not labeled number 1, and they're definitely not labeled chicken. But this is usually the introduction. Introductions can be fairly brief. Okay, so if you look at this, you've got really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ideas in here, all about chicken. But this would actually be the introduction, and I'd be introducing my first point, my second point, maybe making you comfortable with some of the research that is already out there, setting the context so you understand the research I did. And usually it's going to end with, down here, a statement of the purpose or the question of the research. You're going to hear signal phrases like the purpose of this research was to, or you're going to see the research question that this addresses. Or sometimes it's a little bit more complicated, and it'll be things like, we look to. But there's an action in this, usually at the end of this first section, that tells you what is going to happen. Obviously here, it's just chicken. All right, so the second section, okay, so this is where things can get a little bit different. If I scroll through this, obviously it's all chicken. But the sections that come next can differ. So the section 2 here, chicken, chicken, it could be a literature review, which is a synthesis of the literature as it pertains to this project. Big fancy word for saying a discussion of the research that's been done, the limits, the benefits, and how it influences us. Sometimes we don't have we don't have a literature review, and that's built into the intro. And when it's built into the intro might be a little bit longer. Okay. Now, sometimes we don't have the literature review at all, as I mentioned, and we move right into the methods. Now, the methods section is usually going to explain to you how research is done. Okay? So when we look at how research is done, it's going to be a fairly technical piece that you are able to read. It's called a methods or methodology. And in the methods and methodology, it's going to tell you who they worked with, how they did it, what procedures, what statistical tests. It's basically the recipe for the research. Okay, so you could see things like, what we're seeing in here. You could see charts, you could see graphs, you could see equations. In this case, I would have expected, if this was a real article, to hear a lot more about how the research was done, not just one specific chart and a little bit of text. Now, after the methodology, you're going to have the results. Results tend to be highly technical. They tend to, if we're dealing with statistical, quantitative types of data, you're going to be reading about numbers or seeing numbers. If we're dealing with qualitative, you're going to see it. It's going to be presented a little bit different in the findings, usually with many quotations directly from the process itself. After the result, the key thing with the results is that the results are really just that. It's not an interpretation. It's not an explanation. It's definitely not a connection to the research question. It is going to be straight in front of you, telling you what the results are. Okay? The results tend to be a little bit hard to work with. If you look at some of these in here, you're going to notice that, it tends to be fairly technical. You might need a specialist, you might need a scholar to help you through it, just because the nature of results are they're complex, they're detailed, they tend to be pretty big in a journal article. Now, what's really useful after that, though, is this area here called number 4, chicken. And what that is the discussion and conclusion. So sometimes you'll see discussion, sometimes you'll see conclusion, but the idea here is the author is finally talking to us. In the first section, the intro, the author is telling us about what other people have done so that we understand what they're going to do. In the literature review, they're talking all about what other people have done. In the methods, they give you the recipe to get the research done. The results are the findings. But finally, when we get to the conclusion and discussion, you can have one or both. What we're going to see is the researcher telling us what all of this means. A good article is going to tell you the answer to the research question from the beginning, or the purpose. They're going to answer what they learned. So this last section, number 4, chicken, is our most valuable because it is the one where we learn the answer to the research question, where we understand what the author is doing, and they're talking specifically about their own work. So when we're working with journal articles, we're going to read the intro. We're going to skim through the methods and the results, understanding we may or may not understand it, especially the first read. But what we're going to concentrate and do a deep, slow, close read on is going to be our last section, that discussion and conclusion, or both. Sometimes they both appear. Oh, by the way, at the end, you're going to always see references. One of the nice things about research articles is that the author will always tell you what they built their work off of. And this is a rich and really important part of the scholarly process. So today, this really quick video was here just to get you used to the format of a journal article. Again, remember, we start up at the top where it tells us about the article itself and the author and where it's published. We have an abstract or, little commercial, little overview. We have an introduction that drops us at a purpose or question. We may have a literature, we may not. We'll have a methodology, a results, finally that conclusion and discussion where we spend our time, followed by references. I hope this helps. Thanks for reading with me.